Hello and welcome to Soberanía, the Mexican politics podcast. I'm your co-host, José Granados, Ceja, Mexican journalist living and working here in Mexico City, staff writer and host of the podcast over at Venezuela Analysis, as well as a presenter on Sin Muros on Mexico's Canal 11. And today we're coming to you from a very cold Mexico City, and I took advantage of the opportunity to lift my hood up Jedi styles, which is what I do in the mirror all the time when I wear a hoodie. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Kurt Hackbarth. Kurt, welcome to the show. How are you handling it?
Kurt Hackbarth today, because I'm cold in this city. What the hell? It's like you go from this extended rainy season directly into winter.
Yep.
With like
nothing in between.
Nothing in between. Give me a couple days of fall. Like, would it hurt? Like, okay, one day of fall? Is that give me some more. I'm cold here. Give me something else. Give me something else to put on here. More clothes.
Here, I'll give you this one if you want.
Yeah. No, I got stuff.
I don't need that much.
All right.
I did grow up in Toronto for a period of my life.
Have more scarves. Everybody have a scarf. You guys have a scarf over there in the audience. Kurt Hackbarth. What do I do? Oh, I write for Jacobin Magazine in the United States.
That's what you do.
Canal 11 here in frigid Mexico City. And we're only exaggerating a tiny bit because it is cold. Ready for another episode of
Soberanía. Right. Oh, you got some safeties there on your guns. This.
I got to take these gloves off because I can't even use the computer with this. So I'm just gonna my blue hands are just kind of tremble their way over to the keyboard.
For people who think we're exaggerating, the difference is down here there's no heat in our homes. So unless you have a fireplace, which would be extraordinary. I think only in Lomas de Chapultepec you will see somebody with a fireplace or a little space heater, but those are dangerous. Not advised. You just got to put another coat on. That's why I'm wearing my color guindas sweater today.
There you go.
All right, let's go to the rundown.
Let's do the rundown.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we got to be moving. We got to get moving. Acting and talking. The kind of.
Soberanía number 84. We're going to be talking about Mexico and the old world. There's a bunch of news involving Mexico and France and Spain and the European Union and CELAC had a meeting together with them. So lots to say about that and what it means in this moment of tension. Indeed. We're going to be talking about Salinas Pliego, our least favorite oligarch, who is going to finally have to face off with the Supreme Court.
His week of reckoning has arrived.
It has come. And then there was this weird story about Israel saying that there was a plot by Iran to assassinate somebody from the Israeli embassy here in Mexico. And they made a bunch of claims that were then denied by the Mexican government. The whole thing is really suspect. And as always, losers and haters, we're going to take an opportunity to talk about these so-called Gen Z protests and the way that they're being weaponized. Okay, Kurt, let's get to our first topic today. Salinas Pliego. No, Mexico.
Sip of hot coffee here.
Yeah, that's what I need a little bit more coffee. I'm all out of sorts.
It's actually ponche time.
Oh, I love ponche.
All right, maybe we'll bring some ponche into the next episode. Mexican ponche is...
top.
Just for the season.
All right. I'll bring this headline up here. Mexico and Macron reaffirmed their strategic partnership between Mexico and France. And we can see this picture there inside of the president's office together with French President Emmanuel Macron. Sorry, every time his name comes up, I have to mention this anecdote.
Yeah.
When Ebrard was foreign minister under López Obrador, and he goes to the morning press conference, and he speaks French.
Yeah.
And so he pronounces it with a French accent. Emmanuel Macron. They went to town. I mean, you can't get away with anything in this country. Even when you do things more correctly, you get criticized. I love it. That's Mexican humor.
It's Mo from The Simpsons, right? Oh la la.
It's exactly that joke. So we had French President Emmanuel Macron here.
How do you pronounce it?
Emmanuel Macron.
Macron.
I may have lived in Canada, but I did not live in Quebec. And my French is not very good.
The pile on. Yeah.
Please go ahead, make fun of me in the comments.
We miss Alex Trebek, kind of that snotty way of always in jeopardy, always pronouncing the word exactly how it's supposed to be. No, I'm sorry, the answer is Macron.
Yeah.
Like, shut up, Alex.
He had all the answers.
Yeah. He's looking up the answers. He had all the time to practice the pronunciation.
Oh, goodness. So anyway, as I was saying, Emmanuel Macron comes to Mexico. This was, I think it was first pitched in the G20 when they met face to face. Some follow through on that. It didn't make a whole lot of noise here in Mexico, but nonetheless is an opportunity to talk about other bilateral relationships. Sometimes the Mexican foreign policy discussion is pretty much consumed by a relationship with the United States.
Yeah.
Here we've talked a lot about Canada and obviously the rest of Latin America, but this one doesn't come up too often. But nonetheless, an important moment in terms of diversifying our relationships with other countries. Macron is an interesting political figure. But the one takeaway for me that I thought was really important was the acknowledgement that there has to be, an actual rules-based international order, that we should have respect for international laws. It was obviously, without saying directly, the United States should stop doing what it's doing and threatening all of its neighbors here in the region. I think still, nonetheless, important to see this kind of exchange. And, they did the usual kind of statements about, strengthening their strategic partnership, inviting new investment and all the rest of it. But that was pretty much it. I mean, there wasn't any major deals announced. They talked about reopening one of the kind of strategic cooperation offices, and that was basically about it. Did I miss anything on that story?
Well, no, that's the thrust of it, right? It's using the moment to stress the fact that Mexico just doesn't depend on the bilateral relationship. Obviously the problem with Macron is he'll say something good about international law and foreign policy, and then the next day he'll say the exact opposite. That's always been the thing with Macron, talking out of both sides of his mouth, right? This is the guy who Mexican buenondistas, semi-progres, were trying to hold up years ago.
Oh, that's right.
The model of this is the way the Mexican
not
left
Lopez
should be.
Obrador, not that
This
populism.
This is the responsible left right here, right? Macron, for God's sake, right? This awful center who has got this, I think he's 20. What's his approval rating?
Oh, it's in the dumps. He
It's
can't
in the
even have his
absolute dumps,
government
right?
in the office for very long. It's a
They
mess.
just cycle through prime ministers. He called a snap parliamentary election. The left coalition came with the most seats. Refuses to name, a left prime minister, even though that left bloc won the most seats there. But this is the example that the Denise Dresser contingent in Mexico attempted to use at the time as an example of an enlightened progressive government. Someone who is so authoritarian that he can't even recognize the results of his parliamentary election, which has led to the country to a nonstop political crisis ever since that happened over a year ago.
And one that doesn't seem to have an exit.
They have no exit because he just keeps nominating the same kind of prime minister over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Right? So there you are, right? Macron probably needed the trip more than Scheinbaum needed him to come, frankly. But it's also, as you say, at this moment when the U.S. is threatening the entire hemisphere and blowing up ships and blowing up boats in the Caribbean, it still has that important, just that symbolic meaning, just that.
Yeah. And Mexico's place in the world, right?
Right.
That this is a moment for us to have an opportunity to have these exchanges, to deepen these relationships, to pick up projects that maybe fell off a little bit with, a country that still has some important sway, especially within the European Union, I think, especially with the exit of the UK from the European Union. So I think in a lot of ways, a positive meeting, but not too much beyond that.
Not too much beyond that. Let's recall that Franco-Mexican relations went through a real nadir.
Yeah.
Not Ralph Nader, Nadir, in the Calderon years because of the Florence Cassé affair, right? Yep. With Israel Vallarta, with the montage, the setup, the faked arrests, broadcast live on Televisa. Then President Sarkozy got involved, trying to get her out. Sarkozy, who just went to prison for 20 days? I think.
Oh, was that it?
Yeah, he went for all of 20 days and popped back out, right?
Oh, jeez.
But, here we go. There's the example of the justice systems that we have to aspire to, right? And it led to the canceling of a joint Mexico-France mega event. There was going to be, the year of cooperation. So, things really got stretched, And this is interesting because there was traditionally great deal of cultural ties between Mexico and France. There was a time when the Mexican intellectualia would go to France so as not to go to the United States, right? And that was the big destination, Paris, right? And so then you saw that getting stretched to the limit when even Sarkozy could look good compared to Calderon's handling of the Florence Cassé affair.
Right, right. And you mentioned that this is a relationship that has gone through its ups and downs. We go back further into history when France invaded Mexico.
Oh, there was just that.
Just that.
Right. And installed a Habsburg emperor on the throne.
That's right. That's right. We promptly kicked out.
Yeah.
Sending a clear message that we will not have any kings here.
Yeah. It's France's awful colonial history is always, so close in Northern Africa, right? And, the Battle of Algiers and all of that. But yeah, let us never forget that it was France that installed a Habsburg emperor on the throne here.
That's right.
And failed. But not for lack of trying.
And well, speaking of countries with difficult bilateral relations, last week we talked about the relations between Mexico and Spain, and that we saw that there was a little step towards progress in terms of an unofficial event, not exactly coming from the prime minister or president of Spain, but a statement nonetheless from the foreign minister around apologizing for the crimes committed during the invasion of the Americas by Spain. And we asked during last week's program, is this
a one-off?
Is it just a one-off? Is this just something kind of happened in one particular event? It looks like things are pointing in the right direction. I bring up this headline here. Normalizing relations with Mexico is a priority for Spain, says the Spanish prime minister or president, the ministers. Pedro Sanchez. How about that? So it looks like it wasn't just a one-off, but instead is actually looks like an opportunity to actually repair things. What do you think is behind Pedro Sanchez coming around?
As we talked about on last week's show, and it's worth repeating, Spain is finding itself frozen out, right, of the world's 12th largest economy. We saw with Iberdrola packing up, it's packing up ship and leaving, right, after attempting to, have its claws on the Mexican electoral grid. And they saw the writing on the wall, right? That Europe is in a prostrate position with regards to the United States. It's in, a constant energy crisis, right? Because, lost its supply of energy resources from Russia. So now it's having to buy liquefied natural gas at a nice hefty markup from the United States. The whole blowing up of Nord Stream. Just, the general state of affairs in Europe. Spain all of a sudden realizes, oh, gee, I think we kind of dropped the ball, not only with, Mexico, but with the rest of Latin America. Remember at the Gustavo Petro inauguration with the sword of Bolivar and the King of Spain refused to stand up and,
Well, as we talked about last week, Pedro Sanchez himself saying, I'm going to be in solidarity with the king who didn't get an invite, and I'm not going to go to Claudia Sheinbaum's inauguration. Yeah. That could have been a good moment to begin to repair things. He decided to side with this. So something clearly prompted him to really...
Something clearly shifted there that, I think even post-Franco Spain realized that their foreign policy is an anachronism. And it takes a lot for them to get there. And they're inching their way along. Right. First, the foreign minister put out his statement at that art exhibition in Madrid, kind of a trial balloon to see how it would go down. It went down more or less okay. The usual criticisms from the usual voices, the fascist voices of the peninsula. Right. But those were to be expected. And so then you saw Sanchez following up with almost the same language. That's what annoys me, because it's so canned and prepared. They both use the word claroscuros, which is light and shadows.
Of course.
As if wiping out 90% of the indigenous population of Mexico could be summed up
There was
by
a bright spot there. Yeah, somewhere.
light and shadows.
Yeah.
Where was the light?
Yeah.
Where was the light, actually?
Well, there's some who would argue that the light was the Catholicism.
Oh, that's right. They were the missionary, the grand missionary work, right? To grind the other 10% under their heel, right? The 10% that survived. Right? So the whole point of this is to point out again how Europe, right, is trying to maneuver, right, in this time when they're being humiliated by Trump.
Yeah.
And they're realizing that, oh, there's the rest of the world there that we've, left unattended. Are they doing it cleverly, astutely, diplomatically, forthrightly? No. But it's interesting that they're at least trying in their own halting way. Macron shows up. Sanchez echoes his foreign minister by giving a very hedgy kind of light and shadows kind of apology. That's not going to be enough. And I don't know why they would underestimate people think that it was. But it's interesting that as the rest of the world in the global south, they're, all these maneuvering and the multipolar world and China and, the Russia-China-India link at the Shanghai Cooperation Conference and all these big things that are happening. It's like Europe belatedly, arrogantly, cluelessly, daftly is finally starting to scratch its head and say, oh, maybe something's going on out there. Oh, yeah, maybe we've put all our eggs in the U.S. basket. Oh, maybe we're being too... Maybe we should outreach to other parts of the world.
But I think it's
I've said that in a Christopher Walken kind of...
It's only happening because they've been painted into a corner.
That's right.
Because they put all their chips in one basket.
Yeah.
And it turns out that they don't actually have a very close relationship when the occupant of the White House changes.
Right.
And I think in a lot of ways are regretting it. What we did see also as well, speaking of the old world, was the summit of CELAC, the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, with the European Union. I'll throw this headline up here. Without naming the United States or Trump, the CELAC EU summit focused on tensions in the Caribbean. Interestingly enough, I had to translate a CNN Latin America story because there wasn't much in English about this. Surprise, surprise.
Not surprise, surprise.
And certainly what was out there was not very helpful. At least this one kind of tells us really what was the elephant in the room during this gathering here. I think a lot of it has to do with what we were just talking about, how Europe is kind of figuring out that it needs to preserve its relationships with other parts of the world. But even then, right, we have to remember, we mentioned this last week, that there were some boycotts of this gathering because of a fear of upsetting Trump. Yeah. So you can see that even though they're dipping their toes into this, they're still very much wedded to U.S. foreign policy. But nonetheless, I want to throw this other headline up here. I think it's important from Venezuela analysis. CELAC EU summit urges peace as Venezuela Maduro warns of Caribbean war threats. And the statement didn't explicitly mention it. They danced around it. But there was an acknowledgement that, for example, there was a talk about how to conduct drug interdiction and all the rest of it in a way that respects international law, clearly talking about this, about peaceful resolution to conflicts, all that. So the elephant in the room was acknowledged. Maybe belatedly. I think there wouldn't have been consensus around the resolution had they left that bit out. And of course, even still, because there wasn't a clear enough condemnation, I think it was Nicaragua and Venezuela decided not to sign on to that statement because they were looking for something more forceful. Yeah. But nonetheless, we had this gathering in Santa Marta with lots of heads of state from the region, from Europe, talking about this need to diversify relationships beyond the United States, to have, I think this is precisely why something like CELAC exists, to give that space for countries to be able to talk as a bloc with other blocs, in this case, the European Union.
And it's funny, it's like the guy with the meme with the two buttons. It's like CELAC isn't important, but then countries won't go to CELAC out of fear of how it will look to the United States. So then it is important.
So then
actually it is important and it is being watched, right? All of this first segment is in the context of the U.S. appearing to, for now, hold off on attacking Venezuela, right? We can debate whether that's very short term, somewhat short term, medium term. They're just waiting for their time, right? But there seemed to be a real push over several weeks by the Rubio faction to get that over the line. Including, in some cases, some people would say planting stories like the story in the Miami Herald, trying to kind of goad the Trump administration into taking that last step. That appears to have had the brakes put on, right? The Carrier Gerald Ford, we don't know exactly where it is, where it's heading right now. This is obviously good news, and it has to do with activism, and it has to do with mobilization both in Venezuela, it has to do with also the United States population not being in favor of it, right? I think there were some sober heads, the few that are left there, in the U.S. foreign policy establishment who realized that a ground invasion of Venezuela would be an utter unmitigated disaster, and that they are not going to intimidate Maduro out. So they, as we've said on this show, they pegged themselves into a corner. And so how conveniently that the whole war powers resolution vote shows up to give Trump, I think, an easy out. To say, oh, we don't have the authority, as if they cared about that authority, if they really thought they could go ahead and get away with it, right? And do the invasion and do a Panama. Mm-hmm. So it's important in that context that you then see these admittedly small movements of France shows up, Sanchez wants to improve a relationship with Mexico, the CELAC conference. Because remember, it's not only the threat is not only against Venezuela, right? It's against Colombia, it's against Mexico, and it's against all of Latin America.
Yeah.
So, you have to kind of read the tea leaves on this and see that if the world shifts just a little bit, they're filling in the gap where that invasion didn't happen. And that's good.
Yeah. Absolutely. I wanted to comment on what you were saying around whether or not the U.S. is pulling back. Is it short term? I do think it's a short term. Yeah. I think they're trying to assemble the necessary pieces to continue going. Marco Rubio is the one driving this policy. Mm-hmm. I think he's dead set on actually finding, finally, the means of ousting Maduro. You've talked a lot about the easy coup, which is what they're pushing for. I think that's what they expected. Now that we're seeing the kind of the policy playing out over a little bit longer term now. I got to remember this all started in September. We're now in November of, mobilizing these boats of, mentioning that the Gerald Ford, the largest, carrier in the world on its way here, but maybe, and then it takes a little refueling break. I think it's still coming. I think it's going to get here eventually. All of this is kind of hoping, praying that there was going to be an internal fissure, an internal break inside of Venezuela, and that they would do the hard work of regime change without having to put actual U.S. troops on the ground or whatever. Obviously, that's not happening. And because it hasn't happened, it's given time for forces, even within the United States, even within the Republican Party, who are not in support of yet another war, to actually be able to start to mobilize and press. I think that vote that happened, last week? Mm-hmm. Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, Thursday night. It was going to pass. They had enough votes to do it. There were some people who were kind of on the fence about it. Well, ultimately it didn't, but by a razor-thin margin. And I think it didn't because they said, we're not actually planning on doing land strikes. We don't have the lethal authorization to do it. I think they don't really care. I agree with you that they don't have to have the lethal. In fact, they've even claimed that because U.S. troops are not actually at risk, they don't even have to tell Congress about it, that this doesn't actually meet the threshold for the War Powers Resolution. But nonetheless, they were worried and decided to pull back a little bit and announce that they're not going to. But that doesn't mean it's off the table. And that's the key thing to remember. And so the more that we can have these kinds of spaces, meetings, gatherings, summits.
This was the point here. Yeah.
To come out and say, we do not support these extrajudicial assassinations and killings being carried out by the United States. Again, that's not me saying it, it's the UN. Then the better, right? The more that we can actually build a very broad front to resist U.S. aggression in the region, because otherwise they're just going to keep escalating and escalating and escalating. If you want to, what scenarios I'm imagining, likely the next kind of major escalation would be a land strike inside Venezuela, and then possibly Colombia, and then ultimately building up to the conditions to be able to do it in Mexico. That's the aim. They really do think that this is going to be the magic bullet to solve the drug trafficking problem. They seem very confident about, the work that they've done, the killings that they've done so far in the Caribbean and in the Pacific, feeling like, oh yeah, we're sending a message. There is actually some evidence to suggest that there's less drugs being moved that way. But of course we know they'll just figure out a different way to do it. Maybe they'll build better submarines that aren't detectable and all the rest of it. So anyway, all that to say is that we know what eventually this is, and we shouldn't misread the moment to think that they're actually pulling back, because we know what Marco Rubio really wants.
Meanwhile, the extrajudicial boat bombings will continue.
Yeah, unfortunately. Right? Yeah, there was just one yesterday.
The beatings will continue until morale improves.
Good luck. All right, Kurt, let's move on to our next story here. we're going to be talking about Salinas Pliego's. Finally, he's getting his day in court, all his delay tactics.
Yes.
Speaking of delay tactics, I found this headline really telling.
Yeah.
Grupo Salinas, which is his company, the one that owns Banco Azteca, which you can see on the screen there, Electra, that also owns the TV Azteca brand, has delayed court cases with 102 appeals in 5 years. Does that sound like genuine appeals, or is that more of a strategy to delay and delay and delay?
I don't know, considering some of these cases date back to 2008, right? Yes, so here we are. And if you want another review of the whole history of how the amparo, injunction, not injunction, has been used and abused by the Mexican elite, we went back on the Kate for the People program live yesterday. So check that out, Kate for the People, and she'll be posting clips on there. And then we went into great detail, not only about the first segment, but also in this the second segment about the amparo. So this is really important that we're talking about someone who owes, as we said, some $3 billion in back taxes. And some of these cases date back, to the early aughts, the medium to late aughts there, and this strategy has just been constant delay. Amparo, appeal, appeal, right? And the public anger over the misuse of the amparo, not only to gum up all of López Obrador's infrastructure projects, and not only the infrastructure projects, right? We talked about how they even tried to put amparos against his reform of the distribution of medicine in this country. I mean, anything and everything. The anger over that is what led to the judicial reform, and it's what led to the Sheinbaum's government passing very recently a reform to the amparo law. So now, disfrutan lo votado. This is all I have to say, right? This is the phrase that's used here in Mexico a lot. Enjoy your vote, because we're seeing the fruits of that vote now. Just this week, I think 9 of those cases are coming up here, the Supreme Court, right? And this is where the delay tactics are going to hit the wall, right? Because time's up, right? Time's up on this.
This is, for me, the clearest justification for the judicial reform.
Yeah.
Because 102 appeals in 5 years, right? So that's pretty much covers almost the entirety of López Obrador's term. Yeah. They could never actually get to a point where they were going to rule, finally, on the approximately 50 to 60 billion pesos that his company owes to the public treasury. It was never going to come. They were going to continue to push it. And finally, the only reason I think we're in this position now is because of judicial reform, because there's a different judicial branch of power now. That's absolutely
the case. So disfrutan lo votado. And here's the thing. So these 7 cases that are coming up this week, just these 7 cases alone, the sum total of those is 33 billion pesos. So that's $1 billion and change dollars, like $1.5 billion almost.
Almost, yeah.
Yeah, just about $1.5 billion. So it's no small amount of money. As we've said on this show, the idea of the amparo is that you're claiming that your constitutional rights are being violated, right? The amparo is a big stakes kind of thing. You're saying my constitutional rights are being violated.
And you have to do something because the damage will be irreparable.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So what the court appears to be poised to rule is that none of these, current attempts to block or postpone really have anything new with regards to constitutional matters. It's like they've gone down this road before and there's nothing new to warrant a new suspension, right? If that is the case and they rule that basically there's nothing new under the sun here with regards to a supposed constitutional violation, that means that finally then the Mexican IRS, the SAT, the SAT, will be able to finally charge, right, and force them to pay up. And if they don't pay up, well, then they will send the repo man out. They'll send the repo man out and they'll start repossessing buildings, right, and property.
Assets.
We'd love them to repossess TV Azteca. Take that back.
We'd have to totally remake it though. It's full of his sycophants.
Clean it out totally, right?
And I bring that up precisely because he's gone on a campaign now using his TV station to try to propagandize the population. So he actually published a statement that he had his newsreaders read out, saying that the day of judicial independence has ended, that this is no longer going to be legitimate. And that's clearly the effort. The effort here is to undermine the legitimacy of this court so that in a kind of future moment, he can continue to find ways to not pay what he owes.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of the tell is the fact that he's already talking about going to international arbitration. So going to the Inter-American Commission or going to some of these arbitration panels that Mexico is subject to as a result of its free trade agreements and all the rest of it. The idea is to plant this idea, plant the seed that these aren't legitimate and therefore they're not actually actionable. And of course, we were already seeing a response from Claudia here. The Supreme Court will decide on Ricardo Salinas' debts according to the law. And that's coming from President Claudia Sheinbaum saying what I think is important to respond to some of these kind of efforts to undermine the legitimacy of this ruling. The law is the law.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what the right wing was saying for a while?
Weren't they always law and order?
Yeah. Or you don't consult around the law, you just apply it.
The law is just apply the law. Yeah.
Well, here you are. And now it's not being ruled by a Supreme Court that's in the pockets of the elites of this country.
Yeah, because, the average taxpayer doesn't go and put in an amparo to try to stop the collection of their tax debt, right? So why does he get to do that? The law is the law.
The law is the law.
The law is the law. And it's funny, too, that, funny haha, or what kind of funny?
I can never remember the difference.
Yeah, what's it, right? The walls are also closing in on Salinas Pliego in the United States at the exact same time.
Here's that headline. Legal proceedings against Tebasteca in New York advance over multi-million-dollar debt. Deadline set for presenting evidence. The walls are closing in.
The walls are closing
in Mexico and in the United States.
Right, whereas here it's more around Electra, his company Electra. There it's around TV Azteca itself, right? And there's an ongoing criminal case, right, in New York federal court for a failure to pay over $580 million to multiple creditors, right? And that's now getting to its final stages. And the judge finally said, all right, listen, we're sick of this. We have to, we're putting a final deadline there. You either come to an agreement with your creditors, or we're going to proceed, right? They're giving them like a final. It's funny how the wealthy always get these final, all right, come to an agreement. We'll give you a deadline. It's like, always any average person, right? You would just get, bah, bah.
Of course.
Right? You don't get any kind of, here this like, all right, come to an agreement with your creditors, right? The rest of us, it's just the collection agency harassing you night and day for the rest of your life, right? But here they get all these extra time. But fine, appears that now it's finally getting to that limit. They either have to come to an agreement to liquidate that debt or, the criminal case proceeds, right? And this was the case that I think required him to post that bond recently, right?
Or go to jail.
Or go to jail.
Yeah.
Right? Or, be a wanted person and not be able to step foot in the United States. Right? Now, all of this is happening, if we can put up the tweet there by our friend Samuel, right? All of this while, Hollywood, big oil, and oligarchs are calling on Trump to watch over Mexico's judiciary, right? The Motion Picture Association, the American Petroleum Institute, interesting, and the Business Roundtable, over 200 CEOs, sent a letter to Trump, the Trump administration, urging it to keep an eye on Mexico's new judiciary during USMCA trade talks. Now, that's not specifically related to the Salinas Pliego case, but of course it's indirectly related, right? The new Supreme Court is not going to be the patsy for the oligarchs anymore, right? You see the picture there of the new Chief Justice, right? An indigenous judge from the Mixtec, right? Mixtec Nation there. So this is obviously freaking them out.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So the battle isn't over, folks. Just because, the judicial reform passed and the new judges were seated and the rulings are starting to come down, the battle isn't over, right? That's why Hollywood, big oil, and the American Petroleum Institute and the Business Roundtable, they're watching. They're watching, right? And Salinas Pliego and his minions are all over it, right? And don't doubt for a minute that if they start getting a series of adverse rulings, they will either try to ignore said rulings, or they will resort to any other kind of means, provoking violence, going through facade organizations, trying to heat up the plaza. We say, calentar la plaza, right? Because they're capable of anything. And if they don't have the judicial branch in their pocket, which they're used to, well, then they'll resort to, very likely other means, right? So the idea is to flush them out so that it's very clear, if that happens, who's behind it and, what the mechanism is.
I think what we're going to see is a manifestation of the class struggle as it plays out in precisely these judiciary spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Because if he hasn't already, I'm sure he's already planning on contracting a lobbying firm, of talking to right-wing lawmakers in the United States. So got to get them on side and say, see, look at that dictatorship south of the border, that country that's sending all these drugs here. They're so corrupt, the judiciary cannot be trusted, all the rest of it. And much of it is his individual interest about kind of protecting his companies. I think the problem is that they're all heavily indebted, that they're all on the brink of going into bankruptcy, that his entire business model is falling apart. And I think that's why you're seeing such an insistence on this. But of course, it's also going to be other capital interests, U.S. capital interests in Mexico. And you may see kind of a unity of the bourgeoisie in the United States around this issue, rallying around Salinas Pliego, because they're scared that when they engage in unscrupulous behavior here and they're taken to court, that they're going to actually have to answer for once.
Yeah, then it'll be their turn. So you have to rally around this front man, however much of an odious, vulgar, corrupt figure he may be, because he's your front man.
Yeah.
You rally around him.
The ruling class is very good about class solidarity,
Yeah.
and it's very likely that's what we're going to see. He may ultimately lose because it's an uphill battle, I think, in a lot of ways.
But they will use him as long as they can to try to weaken the judicial reform and weaken the new Supreme Court, right? Because he's the one who's firing the shots right now. So they'll let him fire the shots as long as he can. When he runs out of ammunition, they'll throw him away.
Of course.
They'll throw him away, right? But they'll have used him meanwhile.
Yeah.
That's how that works.
Anything else to say on this topic here? Move on to the next one. We're at the 37-minute mark.
No, I think we should move on. Only that I have a very quick commercial to insert here. If you're interested in the case of what's going on with the new Supreme Court and, U.S. vigilance and the 7 of the 9 cases that are on the docket just this week, boy, are we going to have the guest for you in El Taller. And that will be coming out next Monday. Meanwhile, enjoy the interview with Alberto Toscano, which is a great conversation in 2 parts regarding his new book, Late Fascism, which has also come out in Spanish with Acal Editores under the exact same title, Fascismo Tardío. It's a wonderful talk. We'll put the link in the blurb below about a lot of what we think about fascism is facile and not sufficiently grounded and too Eurocentric and
too
really
stuck in old debates.
Old debates, kind of, the skipping record. The 30s in Europe and Germany, when it was really, if you want to understand modern fascism, you have to look at colonialism. And you have to look at the treatment of the global South. And you have to look at the treatment of minorities within the United States and really broaden that view. And it's a very eye-opening conversation. Yeah. So you've got Toscano this week. And then next week, boy, do we have a guest for you on El Taller if you want to know more about what's going on over there at the court.
That's right. So part 1 is available online right now. Go to our channel on YouTube. And part 2 comes out this Friday. And then we'll have yet another one on Monday. We're really cranking these out. It's great. Share with your friends.
Got a little of the sweat here.
There you go. That'll help with the cold.
Scarf. Yeah, but we're enjoying it over there. And, the response has been great. So we thank you guys for that. And onward.
Keep it coming.
Tahir, yeah.
All right.
And
So,
onward with this show.
next topic here. Iran dismisses U.S. accusation of plot to kill Israeli ambassador in Mexico,
Oh.
which actually came from Israel as well, interestingly enough. So this story is a weird one. We had this news come out, and it was mostly driven by Israel, suggesting that Iran last year was planning to kill the Israeli ambassador to Mexico, here in Mexico.
Yeah.
And here's the interesting bit. They actually said thank you to the Mexican government
Right.
for helping stop this quote unquote terrorist plot. But here's the thing, and here's this headline from La Jornada. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Public Security and Citizen Protection are unaware of an alleged attack on the Israeli ambassador. So the whole thing is probably bullshit.
Yeah.
And if it is, why might that be, Kurt?
So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, right? The matter of Israel is the genocide in Gaza is not just a faraway issue for, from Mexico, something that's happening halfway around the world, right? Something that, one might think Mexico shouldn't get involved in because you're only going to get opprobrium and there's really, nothing Mexico can get out of sticking its neck out. But now you see how close to home this issue really is, right? You see the Israeli embassy very likely lying through its teeth, as it does, and inventing, right, an assassination attempt against its ambassador by Iran, using supposed U.S. sources, of course, right, as part of a long-term campaign to blame Iran, right, for attempting to destabilize. Every accusation for Israel is a confession, right? Because what is the country that has worked on destabilizing efforts and arming and financing right-wing military groups up and down Latin America? Yes, that's Israel. Yes, that's Israel, right? So it's just so on-brand shameless for Israel to, what it appears to be, lie through its teeth and invent a supposed assassination attempt by Iran against the Israeli ambassador here in Mexico, right? And, as you pointed out, the Foreign Relations Ministry had to come out and say, yeah, no, we know nothing about this, right? Nothing, zero.
And one would say, okay, of course, if they were planning this and then they got away with it, that they got caught. I mean, then of course Iran is going to deny it, right? And then, playing into all of the demonization of the Iranian state and the current government there and the rest of it. But when Mexico comes out and says, this is not true at all, you are thanking us for something that we weren't even aware of, I think is what makes it absolutely crystal clear, even to the doubters out there, that this was all a plot by Israel to drive a wedge between Iran and Mexico. And that's what's really about. Mexico is not a small actor on the world stage. It's not as potent, and it's obviously stronger when it acts in unison with the rest of the region. But, it's a major economy. It's a key trading partner of the United States. Of course, Israel would love to drive a wedge between its biggest rival, Iran, in its neighborhood, and other countries like Mexico.
Yeah.
And so what a terrible exercise that they've engaged in, but it shows, at least for me, yet more evidence of why actually, if we need to reconsider our diplomatic relationships, we should be revisiting the relationship that we have with Israel.
Right. Because it's not just a question of what's happening in Gaza. It's a question of what Israel is trying to do right here and destabilize Mexico's relations with other countries, right? And it's, as we said in this and other programs, right? This temporary truce between Israel and Iran is just that.
Yeah.
Israel continues its destabilization efforts everywhere, right? And, the fact that Mexico is one of its chosen, battlegrounds for its Hasbara is telling.
Yeah.
Right? And listen to what the Foreign Relations Ministry said here, because it's interesting. We've been very critical of Mexico's Foreign Relations Ministry for being too tepid on a number of topics. But in this case, they were quite categorical. It says the Foreign Relations Ministry and the Secretariat of Security and Protection of the Citizenry, those two secretariats, informan que no cuenten con reporte alguno respecto a un supuesto atentado en contra de la Embajada de Israel en México. So they inform that they have no report, basically no report whatsoever. That reporte alguno is pretty close to that whatsoever threshold. Yeah. Right?
There's not even like a little crumbs of maybe
Nothing,
there was
right?
some truth to
Otherwise,
this.
they would just say, informan que no cuenten con reportes respecto a, right? Mm-hmm. But they said, informan que no cuenten con reporte alguno. That means any report. Nothing. Right? That's about as categorical as the Foreign Relations Ministry of this country is going to get. Right?
Yeah, probably.
Respecto a un supuesto atentado, with regards to a supposed attempt against the Israeli ambassador in Mexico. Basically, you're lying. And then, the Israeli ambassador goes on, certain interviews and starts to stammer and because she has nothing to say. Mm-hmm. She has nothing to say about it and nothing to back it up at all. So why are they then putting out this bogus, what appears to be very bogus, communique thanking Mexico for foiling a non-existent assassination attempt?
This also says something about how poor the relations must be between the state of Israel and the foreign ministry, despite the fact that they have a sympathetic person in the Cancilleria right now, in Juan Ramón de la Fuente, that they didn't even try to kind of lay the groundwork with the ministry first to say, hey, we're going to say this. Yeah. It would be helpful if you backed us up. But they just went out and did it without even running it by their contacts inside the Secretary of Foreign Affairs. And, well, it blew up in their face.
And as we've said, however kind of hands-off Mexico has been on this issue with regards to the genocide, that's still not enough for Israel. There has to be total and absolute unwavering fealty. So even Mexico's hands-off approach is not enough for them.
It's not enough. Yeah. But again, I think this really should cause us to have to reflect on whether we want to have diplomatic relations, on top of the fact that we shouldn't have diplomatic relations because they carried out anyway. But now it's creating domestic issues
around here in Mexico.
And Israel has a long history of some really questionable behaviors inside this country. Yeah. And this is in addition to the fact that they engage in trainings, which are obviously violations of human rights, and they've done it at the state level, at the federal police when it still existed, all that kind of stuff throughout the region, of course, as well. Not to mention their intelligence software that is misused, the selling of arms and all the rest of it. But I'm talking about, for example, when there was 2 Israelis who were assassinated and they came and were involved, but not really, and didn't share information. Or after the earthquake, remember they sent a rescue team and then they really only rescued certain people that they knew were important to them from certain buildings, right? They didn't actually help with the general labors. There's all kinds of very weird
How about those Israelis down in Chiapas?
That too.
Right? That very weird case of they were kind of giving... What were they giving? Some kind of training?
It's like working with children.
Yeah.
Again, all that kind of stuff should be suspended outright. Yeah. People who serve in the IOF, Israeli Offensive Forces, should have no business working with children.
No business here whatsoever.
At all. I mean, what are they doing? They're trying to cleanse their souls after what they did.
So the point is, it's not just about Gaza, although that is 100,000 times more than enough already. It's what Israel does, and the rest of the world. Just check Israel's awful dark history throughout Latin America. We can talk about that more at another time, but also things just like this. Why are they making crap up like this? What are they after? This is the problem.
And of course, who do we stand with? The people of Palestine and the people of Iran.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yes.
All right. Final segment here. Last 10 minutes. Losers and haters. This is our loser and hater of this week, Ciro Gomez Leiva, one of the more important voices in the private media environment here in Mexico, saying that the assassination of Carlos Manso is the most serious since Luis Donaldo Colosio. All right, just to remind everybody here, if you're not familiar, Carlos Manso, we talked a lot about this in the last program, was a mayor of Uruapan who was killed likely as a result of a hit by organized crime, although there's a lot of doubts surging as the investigation moves forward, We're not going to get into that now. Luis Donaldo Colosio obviously was the priest candidate in 1988 who was assassinated in Tijuana after a campaign event, which basically ended his wing of the PRI, and then in came in all of Salinas' technocrats and neoliberals. Obviously, they later nominated Cedillo, who became president, and all the rest of it. Mexico's history may have been different had he not been assassinated, but it was a major, major event in Mexican political history, certainly at the moment. To compare this with that, I think, is clearly an effort at propagandizing the population. And that's why Ciro Gomez Leiva rises to the rank of loser and hater.
Loser and hater for the week, right? And, Ciro is just, he's just the lapdog for right-wing interests, right? From his show in Radio Formula. But you see these very blatant, descarado attempts up and down the right-wing spectrum, right? You see Vicente Fox, the former president, trying to make hay out of, a tragedy by saying, "Oh, it's going to help us with our voter turnout." There you go.
What
right?
cynicism,
right? Just the absolute cynicism of it, right? Carlos Manso did half of it. Now we have to do the other half. Great.
I'm trying to find Ciro's direct quote, but essentially he makes the case that he justifies his statement is because of, look at the outrage of the amount of, noise that this created as a result of his killing. This is why I say it's equivalent to that. But that's just it, right? This is why someone like Ciro Gomez Leiva is not actually a journalist. You should have a nose for these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Instead of being like just reading the very superficial understanding of what's happening. If there's that much noise and it was that quick, right? And that kind of discipline in terms of its messaging, this is because of Claudia Sheinbaum and Morena and the crisis of security in this country, et cetera, et cetera. It's because there's probably something behind it. There's probably a campaign behind it. We were just talking about before we started recording. It's incredible how fast they were able to try to set the narrative. I mean,
how fast, how coordinated.
We're talking about hours. El nado sincronizado, right? The synchronized swim. I mentioned that as well because, interestingly enough, here's a post from Grupo Formula, which talks about how they're starting to put up barriers around the National Palace because there's going to be a demonstration here in Mexico on November 15th. Now, this demonstration is that AstroTurf Gen Z campaign that we talked about, where, they're trying to take imagery and, signs and all the rest of it from other protests in other parts of the world and Nepal and the rest of it. But the interesting thing is they talk about this demo and they're like, the demo is going to be about security, when this was actually called for before Manso was killed. Right. So you see on social media, like this tweet we have here up on the screen, of them already kind of talking about this in the same way as if this rally was called for this reason, in response to, when all of this is an AstroTurf campaign.
And if you want to know kind of where these Gen Z social media accounts kind of are trying to head, just check if we can go to the last image there, number 16, right? I talked about this on Masio Sarde on the program last week, right? Because if you kind of look at the Gen Z Instagram, or if you look at the Gen Z Twitter, you can tell that it's artificial. You can tell that it's artificial. Now, none of this is to negate the legitimate anger that exists in Michoacan and in Uruapan and in other parts of the country for the security situation. Let's be very clear on that, right? People marched in Uruapan the other day, and they have every right to do that, and they have every right to be upset about the state of affairs and security, even though murders are way down under the Sheinbaum administration. Again, as we said, throwing statistics at people is not sensitive.
No.
Right? You have to listen to where people are.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and these demands are producing results.
Demands
too,
are
right?
producing results.
We've seen them, the Plan Michoacán, we've seen the mobilization of more National Guard troops, all the rest of it. I mean, that's the point of taking to the streets, is to actually produce policy changes, which we're seeing.
Now, that said, Gen Z is a total AstroTurf campaign. I mean, my God. Just look at their Twitter. Just look at their Instagram. Just look at the fake AI videos that they put out. This
image is clearly artificial intelligence, right? They can't even get a graphic designer to make a poster for them. You know how easy it would be to make a poster like that?
Yeah.
Of course not. But no, they just go into their artificial intelligence right after they finish rendering the video that they just put out. They put out this image, which, as you correctly pointed out, is actually quite violent.
It's inciting to violence.
It's inciting violence in a demo that they're trying to claim is about violence.
Wanted, dead or alive, Claudia Sheinbaum. And they also had one about López Obrador, right? Now, they can claim, oh, well, we have these wanted posters for other, and also some right-wing people like Alito Moreno, right?
Yeah.
But the first one you see, if you scroll on their Instagram, is López Obrador. Because that's the first one. And the second one is Claudia.
And they'll say that's because of One Piece and that's what they use in this. But wouldn't you, if you're trying to make an appeal to attend to the problem of violence, not use violent imagery in your own propaganda? It's like there's not even a lot of kind of foresight there.
Right. Not a lot of foresight, not a lot of sensitivity. And it just belies, if you talk to, young people, youth groups, whoever else, they'll express this or that concern. I think the desire to see someone dead is about 0.00001%, right, of the supposed movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. But that's what they put out, right?
I want to bring up this tweet here from La Derecha Diario, the daily right wing. It's another, paid for by very rich people, fake social media thing, where they talk about the narco gobierno, about how the country is tired of the narco presidente and they want to kick her out. And that's why they put up the barriers around National Palace. They're calling for an insurrection. Mm-hmm. They're calling for a repeat of what we saw in Nepal, where they stormed the Congress, and I think it was a different place, but they also burned, an important government office that were using the same kind of one-piece imagery. But this is dangerous, right? And this idea that the country is sick of Sheinbaum when she's getting 72, 73, 75% approval ratings, even in polls done after this whole crisis around the assassination of this mayor, kind of really tells you that they're trying to establish a narrative. They're starting to build those forces to kind of reproduce some of what we saw in Venezuela. We've talked a lot about that, about this idea that they recognize that they don't actually have a lot of weight with the public. They can't win elections. So their only out is insurrection, violence, destabilization, invites of U.S. intervention, et cetera, et cetera.
So speaking of which, let's put up that image in the Congress, in the Cámara de Diputados.
Who is that?
Right. Who is this?
That is the same lawmaker from the PRI who actually assaulted the Senate worker who was filming in that scene we covered when Alito attacked Noroña in the Senate.
That's right. And he wasn't even supposed to be at that because that was a committee hearing. He wasn't even supposed to be there. He was there just to act as a porro.
Yeah.
And just as a,
This image, right? He's wearing a shirt with Manso on it. He's got the One Piece flag behind him. And who's sitting to his right? Rubén Moreira. Right? Like, that is
head of the PRI.
The PRI. Right. In a nutshell, right there, the golpeador, the violent guy next to the leader with this fake AstroTurf imagery, trying to champion the cause of this mayor who was assassinated. I mean, it's all there. The interesting thing, I think, will be what's going to happen on the 15th.
Yeah,
let's see who actually turns out and how it goes. And of course, it's coming up very soon, and we'll cover that on the next week's podcast.
We will. And, this all ties into what we were saying about Salinas Pliego and the judicial reform. Because if the oligarchy and if the elite no longer feel that they have the judicial branch in their pocket, and they're now going to have to deal with a much more objective judicial branch elected by the people coming out of emanando del poder popular, they're going to try more shit like this.
Yep.
They're going to try more shit like this. Right? Because they can't win elections. They can't buy judges now so easily. They're going to try more shit like this.
All right. That's the end of another program here on Soberanía, the Mexican Politics Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Don't forget to check out El Taller, the interview that we did with Alberto Toscano, available now, part 1, on our YouTube page. Got another one coming out, second part, on Friday, and a very special secret guest that we'll be interviewing very soon and putting that out on Monday as everything goes to plan. It's going to be really exciting. Thanks again for joining us.
Meanwhile, I'm going to get some more hot coffee here.
I'm going to put my hood back up.
Try to survive Chile, Mexico City.
So I can feel like Emperor Palpatine.
There you go.
Do it.
recordamos a esos políticos hipócritas e irresponsables que México es un país independiente y libre, no una colonia ni un protectorado de Estados Unidos.